Albertine novel is, in my mind, the most modern part of the research. As I said, going much beyond the initial project in that study of the prisoner and the mourning that follows Albertine's death. And I accept the idea that it produces anxiety in that part. I mentioned Dostoevsky a number of times. I don't see any novels that are more anxiety producing than
Dostoevsky,
Crime and Punishment or The Brothers Karamazov. There is that dimension in it. Certainly.
Someone else here. We must have. It's always the first. I should call on someone first. We've already had one good first question. Anyone. It can be on anything. Lady back here. Stand up, please.
I just finished your book today on Darwin and Lincoln, and not because I was coming to hear you tonight, but the character that kept coming to mind was Proust, in this notion of, and I'm going to mangle your very elegantly stated argument in that book, that what presages modernity for both of them is no longer being able to have this sort of overarching justification or reason to life and what happens in life. And that has always struck me in Proust. And I'm just curious, and that's what makes him seem so modern to me, not that he denies any of the harsh realities of life, but that he fully embraces those and finds some kind of meaning in them that isn't religious or philosophical even really. It's just, he finds the humor and the meaning in those things. And I think Alain de Botton actually is wonderful on that. So I just wondered if you could...
Sure. First of all, you're a very discerning reader, and I can see from the elegance of your appearance, too, you're the kind of reader who paid full freight in an independent bookstore and didn't go for a discount. Yes, I could tell. It didn't go for a discount on Amazon. So, our favorite kind. And discerning. You're absolutely right. I won't bore all of you, because if you haven't read this last book of mine, Angels and Ages, you won't know exactly what I'm referring to. But it's certainly true that that book is really a meditation, a kind of essay about the liberal temperament, about the transformation of minds in the 19th century, as much as it's about those two people. And the last chapter, the next last chapter, the last chapter about its characters, its heroes, it's called Darwin in Time. And exactly my sense is that Darwin confronts the problem of time. How do you reconcile? How does he reconcile his simultaneous awareness that our own lives, our human lives, are hummingbird brief and tiny, and yet have to be placed against this immensity of geological time and biological time? And Darwin struggles with that. And Darwin ends up in something like a Stoic's position. He says you can't reconcile them. You have to be aware of both simultaneously. There's no reconciling them. And I think you could certainly say that one of the things that makes Proust positive, I don't want to make it sound fatuous, but triumphant in the way that Antoine is describing, is that Proust feels he has come to a reconciliation of those two things, of historical time and his own human time, through art, through his ability to write and to recuperate, as we said a moment ago, to recuperate life through language. That is, if not full, is in the sense of a certain kind of transcendence, a certain kind of triumph at the end of the book. So certainly I think Proust comes out at the other end of that same transformation of minds, transformation of consciousness. And I'll have to do an addendum to it. But certainly, in all seriousness, that was the tendency of the argument in that book, certainly, in that essay.
I mean, what made me think today, and I never thought about this before, was because Proust obviously read widely. Is there any evidence anywhere, and I've never seen any, but I'm not a Proust scholar, that he was reading Darwin or aware of Darwin, or sort of the, I mean, it just,
I turned to a Proust scholar.
In fact, I gave a lecture on Proust and Darwin last week.
Did you really?
Yes. No, because last week at the Collège de France, last Friday, no, 2 Fridays ago, there was a conference at the Collège de France on Darwin, because it was the
bicentenary.
And I was supposed to speak of Darwin and literature. And of course I spoke of Proust. And it so happens that when I did the edition of Cities of the Plain 25 years ago or so, I had to read all of Darwin to discover the sources of, if you remember the first part of Sodom and Gomorrah, Cities of the Plain, the encounter between Charlus and Jupien.
Oh yes,
there's a metaphor of the flower, the orchidée and the bourdon.
The self-fertilizing flower.
Yeah, and so all the encounter between these two men is described as a miracle of nature equivalent, I didn't bring it here, to the conjunction of the orchidée and the bourdon. And all this, I spent at that time many days at the Bibliothèque Nationale trying what was the source of Proust's knowledge of Darwin, and in the end discovered that everything that Proust says in the Recherche about Darwin, was mentioned only once in the novel, comes from the introduction to one of Darwin's botanical treatises on self-fecundation of plants by a professor called Amédée Coutances. So everything Proust knows about Darwin comes from those. You know, I don't want to sound harsh, but there is a sort of cliché that Proust was a big reader.
An erudite.
An erudite. It's not true. It's not true. As I said earlier, Proust worked fast. He did everything fast. He wrote fast, he read fast. And he only read the introduction to one of Darwin's books, and this was...
that was enough. That was
quite enough
right.
to assimilate what he needed and for what he wanted to say. So he read those... I mean, this introduction, I think, if I remember correctly, because I spoke about it not long ago, is 22 pages long. So, at most, he read those 22 pages. But if I miss earlier, Proust was a sponge. Everything, he read 5 newspapers each morning. So everything that there are many things in Proust we don't know where they come from. In that case, I know perfectly, because he was also, he tended, as everybody does, to plagiarizing what he read. So the passages of Coutances are transcribed literally in those passages. So there's no, so in that case, I know perfectly what he had read and which sentences.
But don't you think, Antoine, that even that's fascinating. It's a revelation to me that, in a sense, he grasped the kernel of it, which is that he saw that homosexuality could be explained as a rare natural phenomenon rather than as an aberrant moral phenomenon.
Yeah, this is debatable. A number of people argue that this metaphor, this Darwinian metaphor in Sodom and Gomorrah 1. Results in a naturalization of homosexuality. This has been said by a number of people. It's not that obvious because these passages are so ironical.
Yes,
there's irony all through those passages. So to read them as a serious justification of homosexuality seems to me a bit
too simple.
But Proust, of course, Proust was a very good reader. So he went very fast to what was essential.
The metaphoric.
You could do the same thing. He didn't need to read Bergson to know what was important about Bergson. He didn't need to read a lot of Sainte-Beuve to
know what was bad in Sainte-Beuve.
In fact, when you look in detail, you realize that his readings are most often very limited in a book. Even with Sévigné, with a major reference, he didn't read that much of Sévigné. He didn't read that much of Dostoevsky, whom I said is crucial for the. He read Dostoevsky very late, so Dostoevsky is present in La prisonnière en Albert qui a disparu, but he didn't read that much of Dostoevsky. Proust was a bee, like the bee in Sodom and Gomorrah 1, a bee that, I mean, it's the old rhetoric, metaphor of the bee, which makes honey with the flowers that it finds everywhere.
Yes.
Proust worked like a bee, and everything was absorbed in that novel.
A bee rather than an ant who dutifully...
exactly.
Who dutifully,
it was a bee and not a spider which produces its web out of itself. He produced as a bee.